liked learning. I liked being able to be around other kids. I was always very social. So I had a lot of surgery as a kid, dental work and all that sort of thing. So I think I grew up with, and this has influenced my professional life, certainly. I think I have a different understanding, and even as a young person in my 20s and of that age, I think I had a different understanding of vulnerability than a lot of my peers did. So I think that was important. I'd considered going into medicine, and so I studied enough of that sort of thing, chemistry and biology and all that sort of thing, physics, to realize, hey, I like this stuff, but then also thought, well, this health policy, ethics, the humanities, I really like this sort of thing too. So I started to get more interested in health policy and bioethics. And where I did my undergraduate, I had the opportunity to do an internship at a local medical college of Wisconsin. And that was important, and they gave me some interesting and important opportunities there. And so I did a master's degree there in bioethics. And it was at that point that I realized, hey, I think I might like teaching, and teaching medical students and teaching ethics. And how do I do that? Well, you need to go get a PhD if you want to do that. So that's what I did. And I went to graduate school in philosophy because that was sort of the closest thing to ethics. So I really became a philosopher in sort of a strange way. People I went to graduate school with were all people who studied philosophy as undergraduates, which I didn't do. I took a couple of philosophy courses, but I wasn't like really gung-ho about philosophy. But when I came to graduate school and learned how to be a philosopher, it worked for me. And I love teaching. I mean, some people are philosophers who become teachers. I think I was a teacher who happened to become a philosopher. And I really had a lot of opportunities to develop a lot of different interests. So I was very fortunate. I like to play the harp. So at age 10, I began to play harp, and I still do that. I have a little therapy harp now that I volunteer. I go to hospice house, and I go to the hospital and the ICUs, and so that's volunteer work that I enjoy doing. But I was, fortunate that I got to develop myself as a musician, but I also had opportunities to develop my athletic skills and my capacity to enjoy the outdoors and learning about the natural world. And I actually went through a certification program to become certified as a clinical musician. So in my harp lessons, one of my more recent teachers said, hey, you might be interested in this clinical musicianship program. And I thought, what's that? So I learned more about it, and I thought, yeah, I think I would be interested in doing this. So I did. And that really has to do with drawing upon the therapeutic capacity of music to, when you can, make people feel more calm. Sometimes it has some pain relief capacity, or it can distract people from their pain. So it's something that's soothing and anxiety reducing. And so it's a great way for me to share music in the healthcare setting in a different way than I do for my professional work. So there's a curriculum, level 1 and level 2, and level 1 focuses on what they call basic clinical musicianship. So what are the properties of sound that have therapeutic capacity? So not even music, but sound. And what are the ways in which sound can be used for all kinds of different purposes of healing? And of course it has ancient roots that we have come away from in modern medicine. The second part of it, then, the clinical musicianship 2, really has to do with getting in your internship hours. So you're actually getting out there, making relationships with people in the community, saying, I'd like to become integrated into this organization, and here's what I have to offer. Do you think there's a need for that? And most people have been really enthusiastic about it. And so I've played for hospice patients, and I play for ICU patients at the different hospital settings. And it's very rewarding. And the healthcare professionals who are doing the hour-to-hour care also really enjoy it.
You started off as an English major, but you liked philosophy and ethics, and then you moved towards bioethics.
Well, I actually did not like my philosophy classes very much.
Tell me about that.
But I did like bioethics. I liked the experiences that I had at the Medical College of Wisconsin. But my undergraduate classes in philosophy, well, one was very good, but the ethics course I had I didn't think was very good at all. At least it wasn't very good for me. But I was interested in the big ideas, the major concepts, sort of the enduring questions and problems that we haven't been able to really resolve over 2,000 years of humanity. So those were attractive to me. And they're all there in medicine, in research, all those persistent questions about meaning and beginning of life and the end of life and pain and suffering and our capacities to help each other through those things. Those all of those big philosophical questions are in medicine and in research ethics. So they're all there in that context.
What changes were there in you as a person as you pursued these studies?
Good question. Well, in my earlier college years, I think when I was taking a lot of science courses, I really missed writing. I missed engaging with ideas in a way where you're not just memorizing and reproducing ideas, but you are actually synthesizing them in new ways. So the idea of cultivating the capacity to make new knowledge. Well, where do new ideas come from? So what do you have to understand in order to show that you've done your homework? And then how do you build on that to make new knowledge? Where does new knowledge come from? So that's where I guess I became interested in becoming a scholar. That's the project in making new knowledge. You have to be able to teach it to other people or it doesn't have much value. But that project of making new knowledge has been always appealing and important, although I don't think I always knew it really until I got to graduate school and I realized, oh, well, everybody's here to learn how to do this. I'm not the only person interested in learning how to do this. I think my first inklings of, well, what is research, is that research is experimentation. Research is about things that you don't know what will happen. You don't know if it will work. You don't know if it is good or if it is bad. You don't know the outcomes. So there's a mystery. It's one road to new knowledge. There are many roads to new knowledge, but research is one of them. And of course, I think we tend to think of research in a biomedical context because we have a very scientific kind of world. But of course, there's humanities research, and there's social and behavioral research, and qualitative research, and quantitative research, all these different ways of going about this project that we call research. Well, when I began to study ethics, one of the things that you learn about are the abuses of research. And I think we learn about it that way because those are the things that gave rise to the regulations that have come about that govern at least human subject and animal, human and non-human animal research. And so one of the things I've developed a new understanding about is that research is very complex and it's cross-disciplinary, and you need a lot of different types of expertise, not only to do research, but to evaluate research projects. So one question that we can ask about research is, well, which research projects are worth doing? And why are they worth doing? How do we determine what projects are valuable and not valuable, or have more value and less value. So, of course, when I'm teaching in a medical school, the emphasis is on pharmaceutical technology, devices, well, to a lesser degree, but mostly pharmaceuticals are where the emphasis is. And there's often not a lot of thought, I think it's fair to say, about, well, what are the disparities that can be created by doing research? One of the questions that I'm always interested in is, well, how do we know whether this research project is going to be a good investment of our intellectual resources, of our federal resources, of our time, all the different kinds of energies that go into generating new knowledge about pharmaceuticals. And there's very little thought about who will benefit from them. There's much of the emphasis on, well, is it saleable? And who will buy it? And who will pay for it? And for how long will it have this value? Rather than, well, how many people will benefit from this? So, at the macro level, we can see all of the different kinds of inequalities that we have in the healthcare system, at least in the United States. But I think it seems fair to also talk about global healthcare inequalities as well, and health status inequalities. It's not clear that those inequalities will be reduced by any particular pharmaceutical innovation. So I would guess that the major innovations in health status and reducing health inequalities will come from things like helping people get clean water, sanitation. The major innovations in public health, those are the things that really have a deep and sustaining impact on people's life quality over time, all over the globe. And there are lots of those issues that we haven't seen a lot of innovations in, or if we have innovations, we haven't been able to make them accessible.
All right, so your role at Creighton University School of Medicine right now is to teach. You're a teacher of medical students.
Mm-hmm.
And what are your students like when they come to your class, and how are they different when they leave?
So these are first-year medical students in school of medicine, and they come and they're very eager to get really into the practical issues. Now, they don't have a lot of practical experience, but I take the eagerness and I try to run with it. And for the most part, they're really excellent students and really fun people to work with. And they learn, I think, to complexify ethical problems. So some students, not all of them, but some of them have some trouble navigating ambiguity, that there's a right or a wrong, or there's a this way or a that way. But really, ethics is all that gray area in between and navigating your way through the uncertainty. And some physicians in training find that more unsettling than others. So I guess one important teaching point is to try to help them figure out how they're going to live there, because that uncertainty doesn't go away in any kind of practice environment or research environment. So part of an ethics class is teaching people how to navigate their way through that gray area. Yes, there can be right, and yes, there can be wrong, but those things can change over time for different people, for different cases, for different reasons. And the important thing is to recognize when those changes are happening and when they're in play. And if things are remaining static for too long, perhaps there's not enough growth going on. I try to challenge the students, of course, but also try to support them through that process of learning how to navigate their way through those ambiguities.
Is there anything about their understanding or lack of understanding when they come into your class that surprises you?
You know, they always have more understanding of ethics every year because ethics has become so routine. It's really, most of them have had an ethics course as an undergraduate. So 10 years ago, where you might have only half of your class who's had any experience with ethics, now it's almost the whole class has had some sort of ethics, and they understand why it's important, and they understand why it's interesting, and they're there to learn, and they're eager to learn. So that's been a really important and interesting evolution, I think, over the last 10 years.
Now, how involved are you with the IRB at your university?
I am on the social and behavioral IRB at our university. There's also a biomedical IRB, so we separate those two. And the social and behavioral IRB is the smaller of the two. Its workload is not as high as the biomedical, but the problems that we see are different. The kinds of questions that we engage are, I think, are a little bit different. We have 6 people on our IRB. I'm one of the non-science folks. And so I see with different eyes than the members of the committee who do have a science background, who are empirical researchers of some kind. I see more like I mean, I'm not a community member, but I certainly see more like a community member, I think. Tend to empathize more with that point of view. I also see the research and the sort of scholarly dimension of it, but I think it really comes into play during risk assessments. Now, perhaps I'm just more conservative by nature, but when I'm thinking about risk assessments, I'm not just thinking about how I would assess risk, but what kinds of assumptions can I make about how other people might assess risk. Now, I know we have that standard of risk that you might encounter during everyday life, but what kinds of assumptions can we make about other people's everyday lives? I don't know if it's about, you know, the way I think about vulnerability, the way I think about whether it's safe to make certain assumptions about people's perceptions of everyday experiences or everyday risk. So let's say we are reviewing a protocol where they're asking about somebody's experience of assault, or whether there's substance abuse related to their history of being a victim of assault or something like that. So is it minimal risk or something more than minimal risk to ask someone who, let's say the subjects are all, you're interested in their views on these questions because they've been victims of assault. Does it constitute minimal risk to ask people with an assault history, a history of having experienced violence? Is that everyday risk to ask that particular person that set of questions? I tend to say no, it's not, because their experience is they are somebody who has experienced being a victim of violence. So that's not an everyday experience. And having somebody ask you about your experience of violence is certainly not an everyday experience either. So that's one, I think, kind of common set of disagreements. It hasn't been any vehement disagreement or anything like that, but it's things like that on which I tend to be a dissenting vote.
In general, as a bioethicist, can you comment on the application of the more abstract ethical principles? How are those principles applied in a real way in a typical IRB committee?
Well, I think the most clear application of a set of maybe Kantian principles would be, why are we justified in asking this particular subject population this set of questions? And if those questions are invasive in any kind of way, then that increases, at least in my view, that increases their risk. So why is the risk justifiable? Why is this set of questions a good one to ask to achieve generalizable knowledge later? And that's always the key question, really, that the researcher has to address, identify, in the consent form, in the abstract or the précis of the research. So that would be, I think, probably the most concrete way of applying a principle. So the risk of groupthink is that dissent is silenced. And if you're in an environment where there's someone who disagrees with a majority, or there's someone who thinks differently than the majority, if that person is not free to speak up or tell why they think, talk about why they think differently, or they're never asked why they think differently, your deliberative process is broken. And it's particularly dangerous, I think, for IRB deliberations to not welcome dissent. Because, well, there are a number of factors, but one of them is power imbalances, right? There can be power imbalances due to a number of factors. It could be gender, it could be what's your disciplinary background, it could be, are you a community member versus someone who has institutional authority as a member of the faculty or something like that. So the quality of your deliberative process is directly related to how inclusive it is. Just a rote procedural process would be, okay, here's the protocol we're reviewing today. Has everybody read it? Okay, great. Yep, let's move on. Any issues? Nope. Okay, great. Let's vote. That can be very intimidating. And I don't know that there are any committees who actually do it that way. But there's a risk of having that happen, given the time constraints that everybody's working under, given there's the expectation that everybody has read what's in front of them. So even when that's the case, if you have questions about what you've read, and it's outside your discipline, or even if it's inside your discipline and you have questions, you have to have space and you have to have courage to be able to ask those questions. And asking those questions means that you're exposing your own ignorance, perhaps. Maybe it's something you feel like you should understand, but you don't. Or, oh, if I'd read this more carefully, I would have understood it. Well, no, if you have that question, there very well might be other members of the committee who have the question too, but haven't brought it up yet. As a member of the committee who does not have a science background, I'm reading protocols that are written by people who do have a research background, science background. So I'm not always familiar with, well, what exactly are they trying to find out, and why is this an important question? So I always really like to see it very clearly laid out. Why is this problem interesting, important, complex? So, because those three things are directly related to the justifiability of the risk that you're going to put your potential subjects to. So I always really like to see those very clearly laid out. And if they're not very clearly laid out, I like to ask for them. You know, send this back to the investigator, have them justify this more clearly. And sometimes the more science-oriented members of the committee, it will be clearer to them, it will be more obvious to them why this is interesting, important, complex. But if it's not clear to me, I'm guessing it's not going to be clear to a potential subject. I'm guessing it might not be clear to the community member. I'll let her speak for herself. But I would like to see that. Just put it in a brief sentence or two. Why is this interesting, important, difficult? I don't want to have to assume that the potential subject is going to know that. Oh, because that's what tells you why would it be important for me to participate in this study? So that's what I mean by being able to ask questions about the protocol. To whom is it obvious that this is an interesting, important, complex question? To whom is it not obvious that this is an interesting, important, complex question? So my guess is that the subject is going to be the person who's in the not obvious camp. It's not going to be obvious to that person why this is interesting, important, and difficult. I would categorize it under, I don't know if we call this a principle, but it's certainly an ethical value, the value of transparency. To whom is it clear, and why, and when? And if you're in a position of vulnerability, it needs to be clearer than when you're not vulnerable. And I think that's one of the things that we need to keep in mind as reviewers, that I'm not actually being asked to do this. I'm reviewing it. But if I were someone in the more vulnerable position of being asked to participate in this, what would be the stakes? Whose stakes are there? And those people are not in the room right now. So this was really something I just noticed about myself as a community member, that I took my city training and I had done my research ethics. I've taught research ethics stuff on the CFR and what are the pieces of it that's important and that sort of thing. But I don't presume to know everything in the CFR like the back of my hand. I really rely on the staff to guide me as a committee member through, well, what are the pieces of the CFR that we're actually considering right now that's related to this protocol? So you have a lot of faculty members of the committee, for example, or science-based members of the committee, or so we have expertise in our fields, but we don't necessarily, and we know that the CFR exists and it has these important ideas and principles, but we don't know it as well as the staff tends to, and they have a lot more experience with it. The faculty, the committee members rotate on, they rotate off, but the staff remain the same. So they have a lot of experience with the CFR that we really need to tap, that I feel like I'm tapping all the time as a committee member. So they're not voting members, but they're really critical members, and you have to be able to ask questions. And I think there are some faculty members at universities who are uncomfortable deferring to staff. I think it's really critical to the committee process that you get over that and you ask those questions of the staff. Okay, I don't understand what part we're deliberating on here. Or, okay, I don't understand what part of the CFR is actually the piece that we're trying to interpret here. So you have to be able to ask those questions and accept their expertise. I consider myself relatively inexperienced when it comes to IRB, that level of knowledge, systemic knowledge of IRBs. But we know that there are still abuses in research, in biomedical research, and in behavioral and social research. And because of that, because those big stories hit the news, and we learn that there are those major violations of human rights and of the Code of Federal Regulations, that those things continue to happen. They don't go away because we have IRBs. Hopefully IRBs help mitigate them. They help bring about institutional awareness of what kinds of safeguards need to be in place. Hopefully IRBs will have good relationships with the investigators so that they're willing to come to the IRB with questions, come to the IRB with problems, come to the IRB when they need help interpreting some important part of the CFR that relates to their research or something like that. So there's constant growth. I see there's constant growth. There are always policy changes at the federal level that we need to learn about. That one of the reasons we come to conferences like this one at Primer is so that we can keep up to date on those things. And those persistent changes are happening because they have to, because we're trying to keep up with the demand, this persistent wheel that keeps turning for innovation in all of these different areas of biomedical research and social and behavioral research. So hopefully the IRB process is flexible enough, is reflexive enough to be able to be responsive to actual need.
Do you have a good feeling about the future of ethics in research? And what challenges do you see ahead for us?
I think there's a lot of reason to hope that things are moving in the right direction in terms of research ethics. There are so many good people working on hard problems. They're good scholars, they're caring people, and they're working on difficult problems that affect a lot of people who are vulnerable. And I see that work every day. I see my colleagues doing that work. I see people at Primer, at this conference, for example, doing that work. And these are people who are in leadership positions at universities, at for-profit IRBs, wherever. There's lots of different sectors in which this is going on. And it's always changing. It's always evolving. So I'm hopeful that we have the capacity to be responsive to the actual needs out there. I think there are still abuses and there are still incentives to try to cut corners around ethics in research. But I like to think that the folks who are out for themselves, who are not careful about what their subjects have at stake, I like to think that those folks are in the minority. And that the safeguards that we have in place will work and continue to work, continue to evolve and adapt. Overall, if we can transition the healthcare system to be one that is population health-based rather than individual health-based, I think that would be a good transition to make. We have a healthcare system that is rescue-based. It's into innovation. It's innovation-based. And our healthcare system does those things very well, but that comes at a cost. It comes at a cost of not being able to take good care of a lot of people. We can take really good care of a few people, but we need to be able to take better care of more people. And so we've made some good strides in that, but we need to continue to make those kinds of efforts to bring more people into the tent, bring more under the tent, into the fold, and have more of a public health-based system of healthcare. So there's a TED lecturer, her name is Rebecca Oney, and she asks this question of, what if we had a healthcare system that actually made people healthy? What would that look like? And she asks, well, why is it that physicians can prescribe a drug, but they can't prescribe food or heat or clean water? Or the things, I mean, those are the things that we need infrastructure for. So there isn't a single person who can resolve that set of issues. But those are really the kinds of issues that we need to be looking at. When you can know by a person's zip code what their health status is and what their access to healthcare is, that suggests something very sad and something that needs to be fixed at the system level. There isn't any one individual healthcare professional who can resolve that. But bioethicists, policymakers, healthcare professionals, all kinds of different people gathering together, teaching about the problem, illuminating potential solutions, and then striving towards achieving those is what we need to do next. Continue doing